Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Peregrine podcast. My name is Anthony Payne. I'm a marketing communications consultant at Peregrine, and our topic today is on crisis and reputation management. I'm really excited to be joined by Andrew Wolfe Murray. Now, Andrew and his team are experts in the area of fixated threat. Now, fixated threat is not a mainstream terminology or understanding within the corporate world, within our world, but the underlying behaviors such as obsessive online harassment, insider threats, grievance-led campaigns targeting both individuals and companies, unfortunately, is growing more and more, and we're seeing more and more cases like that. So this is a very important and relevant subject for today, and within the area of communications and reputation management. So, Andrew, thank you for coming on the show. Do you think you could start with telling us how your team built the capability within the police to assess this kind of threat, to protect high-profile individuals, including members of the royal family, and how that's evolved into the corporate world, into our world? Andrew.
Absolutely. So, well, thanks very much for having me speak. But my background was, as you say, with the Met Police, and I spent the majority of my career in a specialist unit there called the Fixated Threat Assessment Center. That was set up in the kind of mid-2000s, looking at the biggest day-to-day risk to protected public figures in the UK. So the royal family, senior government, visiting heads of state, and anyone whose protection was paid for at public expense. And it was sort of the first of its kind in the world, combining protective security and NHS clinical forensic psychiatrists, psychologists. The reason behind it was that the seats of threat, typical seats of threat like terrorism, political protests, criminals, were quite well known. But this idea about these isolated, lone, fixated, obsessive individuals who, as you say, potentially had a grievance, some had loving infatuations, etc., was much less well known. And all the research was found from the Home Office was that these people don't just suddenly turn up or emerge. They communicate, they present themselves. So the idea behind FTAC was really to help the private offices, help the government departments identify individuals of concern before anything bad happened. And so I was doing that for a period of time, really from it when it was created in the mid-2000s. And we were constantly approached by private clients saying, will you do this for the Queen at the time or the Prime Minister? We get the same problem. Can you help us? So we lifted the model. I took a bit of a leap and left the police and set Theseus up with a couple of others from that same sort of FTAC background to offer that type of service to private clients. And we work across all sectors, including corporate, talent, events. We work with legal advisors, crisis communications advisors, really to help understand the opponents and understand the people who are causing this fixated threat.
Right. And so can anyone be a target of a fixated threat? And what was FTAC again?
The Fixated Threat Assessment Center. Yeah. Yes, anyone can be a target, a victim of it. I mean, you or I could have stalkers or anyone who's got a grievance against us that they pursue to this irrational degree. And we work across all sectors because, it can be any kind of reason or motive behind it. The royal family and the protected people have a slightly unique position in that their profile and what they attract and who they attract is so significant that they sort of impact lots of people. Typically, the royal family would attract people who were perhaps seeking some form of friendship or relationship or kinship. The government attracts more of the resentful. I'm not giving any or casting any aspersions on that, but for whatever reason. And then, within the private sectors, corporates, again, have large customer bases, some of whom can be angry or have a grievance, or indeed, depending on the size of the organization, that employee base. You can have sort of bad hires or bad fires, and that turns into some kind of quest, cause, or grudge. And then in the talent sector, of course, you have that kind of celebrity stalker, as it were, and that attracts its own attention. So yes, having publicity, having a brand will increase the volume of people that have an interest in you. But to answer your question, absolutely anyone could be a focus of it.
And is there a reason why they would become a target?
The corporates in particular. Well, yes, they attract a lot of attention because of who they are, what they do, what they're perceived to represent. And if you're a customer, for example, you put a lot of faith and you rely on that product or that company. And if you feel that there's a grievance or there's some kind of injustice or humiliation, that can start with this sort of kernel of something that develops over time.
Yeah.
The relationship is important. I mentioned the customer and the external one, but with the employee base, there's a contractual relationship there. So if you feel let down by your organization or something's happened to cause that start of a campaign, then it really comes down to that individual's state of mind, their personality, whether they're willing to let it go, and that can escalate. I think going back to the question of who can be a target, the other aspect, and particularly with corporates, is because of their brand and because of their profile, they do attract other forms of fixation and obsession that perhaps you or I wouldn't. So those seeking attention for a cause and using the brand or the company to pursue that or create a platform, those seeking help. We had a lot of this with government departments where people may have had a grievance with something else, but they're seeking help from that department. And really those who are so chaotic and mentally unwell that they're just drawn to the brand for whatever reason and can be very difficult to manage.
Right. And what sort of risks are we talking about? What kind of risks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what grabs the headlines is obviously the violence aspect. And in recent years, the very well-known assassination of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. So violence is absolutely there and a major consideration.
Yeah.
However, for us, in the private sector, there's a whole vast array of other risks, perhaps more nuanced and slightly different from say, the royal family or the government, where they are looking at that physical threat. But we deal with a variety of risks facing organizations, including persistence and disruption, and therefore the impact of time and resources and money managing issues, that reputational harm that comes with campaigns and difficult individuals perhaps causing issues publicly, and also the sort of escalation. So people might be starting to communicate in a problematic way or bring themselves to notice, but what's the risk that that's going to increase and cause harm? And finally, I suppose that perhaps the most important, and we would argue so for an organization and for their employee base, is the distress, the risk of the distress caused to those dealing with fixated individuals. It can be extremely time-consuming, stressful. You're having to deal with often inappropriate, intrusive, and problematic communication.
Yeah.
So, a wide variety there.
Are we seeing this type of threat grow?
Yes, I think it's on the up. I think that's partly because people are getting better at recognizing it for what it is when it hits an organization. I think the accessibility, not just to corporates, but to high-profile individuals, to everyone, whether that's through social media or other forms of contact, is on the rise, and therefore the potential impact that this kind of risk can pose is increased. I think that things going on in the world at the moment, socioeconomic, geopolitical conflicts, all of these types of things increase stresses on society and therefore put people's perhaps obsessions or fixations into more of a significant limelight. I don't know, maybe it's just getting a bit too philosophical, but the idea that I think what we're seeing in our caseload is that people are becoming more entitled and more grandiose and think that they can make extraordinary demands of organizations, whether that's at the board level or executive level, or simply with the people they're communicating with. I mean, it's the bigger the organization is, the more avenues that consumers or the public have to communicate with them. And it's not just security and threat management dealing with this. This is affecting people in all parts of the business. So HR, PAs, EAs. And so, yes, it's growing with the fact that more and more people are becoming affected by it.
And how is the team structured to respond to these types of risks, your team?
Yeah, so we base ourselves on that FTAC model. So we're made up of protective security professionals. We have family office personnel security professionals, investigators and analysts. And all of that's really underpinned by this clinical forensic input that we get from our psychologists and psychiatrists. I think state of mind and often mental illness and mental health plays an enormous part in the risks posed by fixated individuals. So we take that into significant consideration. And so really we're set up as a crisis response threat assessment team, and we combine all those skills to create the best advice on identification, assessment, and management of this type of threat and risk.
When a client comes to you with an issue or concern, how are you, what's your approach to respond to that? What's the sort of process that you would go through?
When someone's coming to us who we don't necessarily have a prior relationship with, they're almost always in that crisis. They've got something that's happening. So our sort of core product, if you like, is a case risk assessment report where we will interview them, meet with them, get all the relevant background and understand the problem, and provide them with a very detailed report that will look at the background, look at all the relevant information, highlight that in case they need it for legal interaction or anything else, and really focus on the individual's motivation, what the purpose of their behavior is, and go through all those risks, as I mentioned. Perhaps the most important aspect of that is to give them a structured, strategic management plan so that they know how to navigate their way out of this problem. Very similar to you, it's sort of giving them that crisis management approach to help them see light at the end of the tunnel and a resolution with that. Of course, if we are speaking to clients and they haven't yet got the crisis and they're looking to prevent that, then we do a lot of training and education, and that's really vital. We want to help them understand the types of risks that they could be facing.
Yeah.
And this type of behavior sort of presents itself more typically in things like harassment, distress, stalking, extortion, blackmail, querulous and persistent complaint. Those are the sorts of behaviors that we would all recognize.
Those are sort of red flags.
Red flags. I mean, a good example would be, and this was one of our first cases actually, was an incredibly long-standing case for a financial institution. And it's quite unique in that respect. But it had been going on for over 20 years, if you can believe that. So It was a former customer or someone who was trying to become a customer for a financial institution. And they were rejected a loan. And that cemented that kind of kernel of truth, that cemented this fixation with them, this grievance that they had. Now, of course, they had other things going on. We later found out that they had underlying mental health issues and severe personality disorders. But this 20-year campaign of harassing and targeting their customer complaints departments, their executive leadership, the PAs and EAs around that, making series of threats, including reputational, but also physical.
Awful.
And really that led to years of different people being focused because it was different jurisdictions, it was different offices. That organization went through lots of mergers and changes. So the grievance is still there. It just moves along with the organization. And so they're left with someone who's been arrested a number of times, given loads of injunctions, but no one's really addressing how to manage this in the best possible way. So, we would come into that, look at all that information and make sure everything's in one place. So provide that single case report so that different parts of the business.
I think you told me earlier that there was one individual working on it full time.
I know. It's sort of, when your organization is paying one person full time to manage one grievance, when your organization has millions of customers, you know you're in a bad spot, really. So, yeah, helping people navigate out of that. So we collected everything, did an assessment, and actually, of course, there are thresholds with mental illness, and this person just wasn't reaching the threshold for compulsory treatment. However, fortunately, our intervention was such that the next time she was at court, that happened to be a few weeks after we were involved, the court did look at it from our perspective and with our information, and we were able to get that person into care and supported. And as far as we know, this was a number of years ago, but as far as we know, that sort of fixed and ended the problem. So a 20-year problem we were able to fix in a matter of weeks, really, by just presenting the information and looking at it in a slightly different light. So yeah, a slightly unique case through the length of time, but not in any way strange or peculiar in terms of the problems and the risks and everything being presented. This was an angry customer who had a grievance that engaged in this campaign against the organization.
You also telling me earlier about how COVID also, has created some problems in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And the state of play of the world obviously impacts how people feel, whether they are under stress, what happens. And COVID was a really interesting time for everyone for all sorts of reasons. But for us in our world, people became more isolated. So if they had a grievance, if they had something that was even just nibbling at them slightly, they had the time and the space to really focus on that. And we saw a lot of campaigns and fixations and obsessions develop from that. There's one interesting case in particular, and this was, again, by pure chance, that an individual, an employee of a large organization, multinational organization, was made redundant, took voluntary redundancy just a couple of months prior to COVID starting, when none of us had a clue what was going to happen. So suddenly they are out of a job, but that's okay. They've got all sorts of prospects. And then a month later, well, no one's getting hired from any organization, and everyone's at home dwelling on their life situation and where they are. So this person really had no support network. They'd had this grievance, and they spun that around, and that a lot of that time and worry that they had led into this belief and this sort of paranoid conspiracy that they were targeted and they were forced out of the organization. So they blamed their line manager, then they took it out on the executive body of the organization. And that led to a whole pattern and campaign of behavior for as long as the lockdowns and the pandemic lasted, really. And that was a mixture, starting off with reputational threats. We see the use of platforms like LinkedIn, particularly in the corporate world, being weaponized to release sensitive information, target executives, threaten reputation.
Gosh.
And that escalated actually into more physical threat towards the line manager. So these things really boiled up at a time when stresses were really high and people didn't have that support network around them.
Yeah.
Again, our management for that was very much presenting the information, both from a civil legal intervention to prevent him leaking any information or talking about things he was legally obliged not to.
Yes.
But also using law enforcement effectively to manage the risk this person had, not just to others, but also to themselves. He was in an incredibly vulnerable position. And yes, he was in the wrong, and yes, he was committing criminal offenses, but, it absolutely protecting that individual was protecting everyone else at the same time.
What can companies do to protect themselves? What should they be thinking about?
My key tips around this would be, firstly, prevention's better than cure. So having a process in place and a structure to deal with what we would describe as communicated threat of all forms, and recognizing fixated individuals is absolutely crucial. So we help companies, for example, develop policies around this, structured processes. We provide training to those in receipt of the communication so that they know when to flag up. What we often see with organizations is they'll have standard policies which go against our management advice. For example, in customer complaints or how a matter of grievance is dealt with. Often they're encouraged to continually engage with people. You've got to respond within 24 hours or something like that. But actually, you need a process to recognize when a complaint stops becoming a complaint. And perhaps someone is posing a greater risk and they need to have that special recognition. Now, I'm not saying it should be one person's job to manage that person for 20 years, but just allowing a slightly different response.
Yeah.
Attached to that, identifying the cases early. So making sure those receipt hubs, those PAs and EAs on behalf of the executive team, those comms teams and social media teams, legal departments, HR departments, where all of these start, are trained up sufficiently so that they can identify it and know when to send it to an investigations team or a threat team or a security team within the organization, or indeed, when to pick up the phone to us if they need that external support.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd point out, and this is particularly relevant because the media always run with the stories of the worst case scenario and the attacks on CEOs or the attacks on talent or royal families or government leaders. Fortunately, violence is the least likely thing to happen, but it's one of those massive impact but low probability events that we have to take it seriously and treat it.
Yes.
But it's not all about violence. I think looking at the other risks that your organization could face when not dealing with this type of threat and risk properly, the reputational impact, in some cases, the share price impact, but perhaps most importantly, the distress, disruption, and that persistent risk to those having to deal with it can be managed if you adopt these processes to better understand it and better recognize it.
Yeah. I mean, often, we might be involved when the process and the issue is already running.
Yeah.
But increasingly, boards, comms teams bring us in for scenario planning, which means that we can start to look at and prepare for some of these issues. And because, of course, speed of response often is really important.
Absolutely crucial. The other thing is people who have a fixation, not all of them have major mental illness or personality disorders, but it is something that's quite common.
Yeah.
So remembering that you shouldn't necessarily treat it how you would typically deal with that type of risk.
Right.
Reputational risks present in all manner of forms, and these ones have to be looked at slightly differently. And I think we work with organizations like yours, plus legal advisors, to really help develop that management plan. And you're absolutely right. If you can tabletop that as an exercise before it happens, so much the better.
Yeah. But
being able to take a step back and recognize the problem for what it is vitally important.
Yeah. And you talked to me about the CTAP 25 tool. How does...
Yeah, we have a structured professional judgment tool, which we developed about 10 years ago through an operational need. I mean, as I've talked about, and you can probably gather, this is quite a niche area of risk, and there are not a lot of people that do it, which is good on the one hand because we can say we're the best at it, but and we are. But because when we first started, organizations were asking us to do all their threat assessment, all their review of all the cases that could be a concern.
Yeah.
We felt it essential to develop a structure process to help organizations or recipients recognize behaviors, content of communication, recognized individual warning factors that would highlight a cases of higher concern. So we developed CTAP with that in mind. So we give that training to all parts of a business, really. And it forms the basis of a communicated threat policy. You know what to do when you receive it and how to recognize that. And we've, over the last 10 years, we've done a lot of research, academic study, peer review papers into that as a tool, into its validity, its inter-rater reliability. And I'm pleased to say it's come out with flying colors, and it's one of the best threat triage tools out there.
Fantastic.
So, we've spent last a bit longer than planned, but we wanted to make sure it was as good as it could be. We've now developed it into an e-learning platform so people can go online and in just a few hours really improve their knowledge and understanding of this type of risk and case. And
Yeah.
It's all going really well.
Yeah, very good. And there's a website for that.
Yeah, the website's www.ctap25.com. That's CTAP. So I could give you the link to put on. Yeah, perfect. So the website is ctap25.com, and that's recently launched and provides a lot of information and access to the e-learning. But we're also going to be putting out a lot of sort of free resources to our learners and users of that. Hopefully return the favor and have you speak on that, because I think giving as much input to users of this and people who wanting to recognize and understanding the management tools to deal with these people is absolutely vital. So yeah, we want to keep giving out as much information about this because it really does present a significant risk.
No, totally. Andrew, thank you so much for your insights. A very important subject, a growing problem. We're seeing more and more cases like this. So very relevant for comms teams and marketers to think about. So thank you very much for coming on. And again, as Andrew says, for more information, go to the Theseus website, look at the CTAP 25 materials, all incredibly important and useful and relevant. One last question.
Sure.
Theseus, where did the name come from?
Yeah. So Theseus, for all those sort of Greek mythological fans out there, was a warrior who famously fought the Minotaur in the maze and saved all the local individuals who were being sacrificed. But so we came up with Theseus because this really is a kind of maze in terms of the difficulty in dealing with these people, helping to identify them, helping to manage what often seems like an impossible task to get out of. So we thought it was very appropriate, and it seems to go down well.
Fantastic. Andrew, thank you very much.
Pleasure.